Every year at ResusX, we have some debates, and this year is no exception. This year, we're talking about mechanical versus manual CPR. What are the differences? Does it matter? Should you have these mechanical devices in your department? This year, we're bringing in Anand, the Swami, Swaminathan, and Salim, the rebel, Rezaie, to hash this out. And I'm really excited for this debate. So, gentlemen, the rules of the debate, they're simple. Each one of you gets 7 minutes to state your position, and I'll come in between just to